Solo failed to perform at the box office, but was the movie itself to blame? Or was it the fault of rabid Star Wars fans? Ron Howard has a theory, or four. It's hard to fathom now that Scott Pilgrim vs. the World wasn't a huge success upon its release. Based on a series of graphic novels, the 2010 Edgar Wright film featured an all-star cast, including Michael Cera, Mary Elizabeth Winstead, Brie Larson, and Chris Evans. Cera plays Scott Pilgrim, a young rock band member who begins dating the elusive Ramona Flowers, played by Winstead, while also facing the fury of her 7 evil exes.
The only thing keeping me and her apart are the 2 minutes it's gonna take to kick your ass.
You dated a famous guy?
In 9th grade, we had drama.
Sadly, movie-going audiences didn't pay much attention to Scott Pilgrim at the time, and it failed to recoup its $60 million budget during its original theatrical run. Edgar Wright wasn't too hurt by the film's failure, as he was reassured by Michael Moses, head of marketing at Universal Pictures, that it would eventually find its audience. In an interview with Collider, Wright said, "It was just one of the best emails about anything in my career I've ever received. Michael Moses sent an email and all it said was, 'years, not days.'" The film is now widely considered a cult classic, featuring iconic roles for each of its cast members. Those actors have remained loyal to Scott Pilgrim. Every one of them agreed to return to their roles via voiceover for Netflix's Scott Pilgrim Takes Off, an animated series that takes a slightly different approach to the original story. In the 2000s, Judd Apatow-produced comedies were not only plentiful, but very commercially successful. Highlights of the decade included Knocked Up, Pineapple Express, and Forgetting Sarah Marshall. Even the 2010s saw several box office successes in This Is 40 and Trainwreck. The decade also saw some slight disappointments, however, including 2012's A 5-Year Engagement, starring Jason Segel and Emily Blunt as a couple whose wedding is continuously postponed for, you guessed it, 5 years. The 5-Year Engagement was a major disappointment by rom-com standards, failing to top that weekend's Think Like a Man or The Hunger Games in its 6th week of theatrical showings. The film's domestic numbers didn't break even against its $30 million budget, though thankfully it grossed a total of $54 million when combined with its international box office results. Still, compared to the previous year's Bridesmaids, it was a rough turnout for this Apatow-produced flick. But the film's reviews suggest that it was a diamond in the rough after all. Entertainment Weekly called it an enjoyable grab bag of messy life circumstances, while the New York Times commended the performances of its 2 leads and the chemistry between them, despite its romantic comedy cliches. It's well worth the viewing, especially to see early supporting roles for future stars Chris Pratt and Alison Brie. DreamWorks Animation entered the 2010s after a successful decade of producing some of the highest-grossing animated films of all time: the Shrek trilogy, Kung Fu Panda, and Shark Tale. It wasn't until 2012 that the studio hit its first snag. Rise of the Guardians showed potential as a new franchise, assembling a ragtag team of imaginary childhood figures including Santa Claus, the Tooth Fairy, and the Easter Bunny. The critical response to Rise of the Guardians should have seen it join the ranks of DreamWorks Animation's biggest hits of the decade. With Empire writing of the film, it's gorgeously designed, deftly written, and frequently laugh-out-loud funny. Unfortunately, the film not only underwhelmed, but had disastrous effects on DreamWorks as a studio. With a budget of $145 million, Rise of the Guardians may have pulled in over $300 million worldwide, but it was still viewed as a failure. During a fourth-quarter earnings call, DreamWorks CEO Jeffrey Katzenberg told analysts the studio had lost over $80 million on the film, and budget cuts and layoffs resulted.
Am I on the naughty list?
You hold the record.
If Judd Apatow-produced romantic comedies were struggling in the early 2010s, there likely wasn't much hope for one without a star producer.
I just had sex. I'm about to eat nachos! It's the greatest moment of my life! Unless you screw it up with whatever it is you're about to say.
That happens to be the case for the hidden gem What If. Fresh off his franchise run in Harry Potter, Daniel Radcliffe stars opposite Zoe Kazan as a med school dropout who falls for a girl already in a relationship, struggling to overcome his growing feelings for her. Even though the film's budget was only $11 million, it barely crossed the $8 million mark after its limited theatrical release. This came in stark contrast to the film's critical reception, with its premiere at the Toronto International Film Festival causing The Hollywood Reporter to say, "Hitting all the rom-com notes Doped with wit and some charm, it will be a crowd pleaser in theaters and help moviegoers move on from seeing co-star Daniel Radcliffe only as the world's favorite wizard. Although What If wasn't the success it seemed destined to be from early reviews, it's a home run for fans of the romantic comedy genre. The Hollywood Reporter was right to declare it as a necessary transition for Radcliffe, who impresses as a more down-to-earth character here far more than he did as the boy who lived. Before Chadwick Boseman made his Marvel debut as Black Panther in 2016's Captain America: Civil War, he was an incredibly promising dramatic actor. He followed up his performance as Jackie Robinson in 42 with an ambitious role as James Brown in 2014's Get On Up. Boseman initially turned down the role, telling The Guardian, "I was like, what's next? Give me something else. He's too big an icon." Boseman's acceptance of the role, however, allowed him to showcase just how much he could throw himself into the character, and critics were receptive. The independent critic commended Boseman's performance as Oscar-worthy and even went so far as to tout Get On Up as a better film than director Tate Taylor's previous work. While Tate Taylor's The Help was an Oscar-nominated film, rest assured that Get On Up is vastly superior in almost every way. Not only was Get On Up not nominated at the following year's Oscars, but it failed to do well at the box office, earning only $33 million off a budget of $30 million. Its opening weekend likely wasn't any help, since it premiered against Guardians of the Galaxy. Thankfully, Chadwick Boseman received his vastly overdue praise in later years. Between the culture-shifting box office success of Black Panther and his posthumous Oscar-nominated performance in Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, his portrayal of Brown in Get On Up, however, should not be forgotten. In the 2010s, it was rare for Disney to flounder at the box office. Some of the decade's biggest films included Disney productions like Avengers Endgame, Star Wars: The Force Awakens, and Frozen 2. One surprising flop, however, was 2015's Tomorrowland, an original sci-fi film based on one of the park's themed lands and directed by Brad Bird, who helmed successes like The Incredibles and Ratatouille.
No way.
With a cast including George Clooney, Hugh Laurie, and Britt Robertson, it came as a shock that the film was a financial loss of nearly $150 million for Disney in 2015. Its total box office gross worldwide ended up just over $209 million, a poor profit from its budget of $190 million. This failure could be attributed to the film's mixed critical response, which labeled its storytelling as uninspired amidst dazzling visuals. The New York Times stated, "It's not another glib, phoned-in piece of franchise mediocrity, but rather a work of evident passion and conviction. What it isn't in any way convincing or enchanting." Despite the negativity that followed Tomorrowland, and perhaps the impact it had on Disney's risk-taking, Bird expressed pride in the finished film, comparing it to another box office bomb of his that later found its audience, 1999's The Iron Giant. He said in an interview with Entertainment Weekly, "Now it exists, and people can discover it. The movies outlast the criticism of the moment. They exist separate from all that, in time." Sadly, some movies are dead on arrival when they make their box office debut, but few were as haunted by criticism as the 2016 reboot of Ghostbusters, directed by Bridesmaids filmmaker Paul Feig and starring an all-female cast, including Kristen Wiig, Melissa McCarthy, Kate McKinnon, and Leslie Jones. After 2016's reboot plans were announced, many longtime fans criticized the decision to seemingly disrespect the franchise's continuity.
This can't be happening. Oh, what's happening, Aura?
When Ghostbusters hit theaters in the summer of 2016, it grossed $229 million off a budget of $144 million. Feig later confirmed that the film's poor box office performance was to blame for Sony's decision to not move forward with a sequel. Although years later, the company continued the original Ghostbusters continuity with Ghostbusters Afterlife. It's a sad fate for the all-female Ghostbusters, considering the film itself certainly didn't warrant all the hate it got online. In a review for the New York Times, the film was praised for its real comedy chemistry and emotionally fleshed-out performances, and was deemed at once satisfyingly familiar and satisfyingly different. It might not have the nostalgia of the original cast, but as far as comedy films of the 2010s go, it's an incredibly lively film that deserves more appreciation. If you were to tell a fan of cinema that Blade Runner 2049 was a financial failure, they understandably might not believe you. The film was a highly anticipated follow-up to the gritty 1982 sci-fi classic starring Harrison Ford, with direction from Denis Villeneuve and leading roles from Ford, Ryan Gosling, and Ana de Armas. It was one of the most critically acclaimed films of 2017. Rolling Stone called it an instant classic in their review, believing it more than exceeded fan expectations for a worthy successor to the original film. To the shock of many, the film's box office performance was incredibly underwhelming. Its opening weekend performance was expected to total nearly $50 million, but ended up inching just over $31 million. Against a massive $150 million budget, Blade Runner 2049 capped off its entire theatrical run with $267 million, baffling analysts who felt the film had strong marketing and hype around it. Deadline theorized why the film failed to attract audiences to the theaters, naming a few reasons. Firstly, they reminded fans that the original film didn't exactly set the box office on fire either. They also noted its ballooned budget of over $100 million, arguing that the fan base of Blade Runner was not substantial enough to justify such an expensive reboot. The Star Wars brand isn't as infallible as it once was in the 2010s. When J.J. Abrams' The Force Awakens became one of the highest-grossing films of all time, Disney's acquisition of Lucasfilm put the release of live-action Star Wars films into hyperdrive, including a highly anticipated Han Solo origin film, Solo: A Star Wars Story. While the prequel was missing perhaps the strongest selling point of a Han Solo origin story, it did have an incredible cast. Alden Ehrenreich took on the role of the charming smuggler, while Emilia Clarke, Woody Harrelson, Phoebe Waller-Bridge, and Donald Glover gave supporting performances.
You're good. Yeah. You're very good. But not good enough.
Some fans, however, were hesitant going into the film as its production was reportedly troubled. Directors Phil Lord and Christopher Miller were fired by Disney mid-production and replaced by Ron Howard due to creative differences. Sadly, Solo became the first box office disappointment of the franchise, making $393 million from a budget of $275 million. Howard went on to blame the film's failure on the fan climate following 2017's The Last Jedi, saying on the Happy Sad Confused podcast, "Whatever millions are made worldwide, those are the hardcore fans, but it didn't hit that zeitgeist point for whatever reason. Timing, young Han Solo, pushback from the previous movie, and some trolling, definitely some trolling. While it might not be the strongest Star Wars outing, it's still a fun sci-fi adventure that deserves more appreciation from fans."